There
Oh, that's
we
right.
go.
And I can look and see live comments.
You can look and see live comments. So the comments should show up on the right. Oh, hi. Someone's already here. I know.
Hello.
It has been a good week. It's been a very busy week.
You've got like secret good news or something that you were happy about on Insta stories.
Yes, I do have secret good news. The secret good news is more book deals, which I literally concluded about 2 minutes before Amal joined the stream. So yeah, if you joined 2 minutes early, you would have seen me still on the phone. But
excellent. You love to see it.
Love to see it. Yeah, okay. So I got to do the intro this week. I don't know how to do the intro. This is going to be interesting. All right, so we are going to start. Hi, guys. Welcome to Agent Talk with Seth and DongWon. This is a weekly live stream where usually two veteran agents talk about various aspects of the business in the hopes that we can make the process a bit more transparent and accessible to new agents. This week, Seth is on a lake somewhere having a grand old time with his family, so we asked Amal El-Mohtar to come in and be our first guest on the program. We're hoping to have more guests over time and get different perspectives on the business. I mean, you know, Seth and I know certain sets of things, but obviously there's a much wider range of experience in the industry. And getting a writer in, you know, to get a little bit of your perspective, I thought would be a really nice way to sort of kick that off. So that said, even though you are a writer and you've been sneaking into these streams on a regular basis, this is a reminder that the show isn't for writers, right? This is a industry perspective. We're going to be talking about how the author-agent relationship goes, not so much to educate authors, which is often how we have a similar conversation, but to talk about, you know, from my end of things and from how we work together, how that's managed, how that develops over time. So it's going to be a slightly different tone, although I imagine some of the topic will be familiar to both of us. This show is free, but if you're able, we'd appreciate if you kick in a few bucks for POC and Pub, which is a wonderful organization. I'm dropping the donate link below, and I'll put it in the show notes after this. Okay, so Amal.
I really feel we missed a trick having you just like introduce me as Seth and continue as if nothing has changed. I think that would have been a good way to open this.
Exactly. Yeah. No one would have ever noticed the difference.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not for writers. A writer arriving here by virtue of just the stream's mandate becomes an agent.
Yeah.
I am now one of you.
Amal, do you want to introduce yourself, or do you want me to embarrassingly introduce you and sing your accolades for a second? What do you prefer here?
I extremely prefer that, and I think it's a really good demonstration of the agent-author relationship. So I think,
you know, I was making a joke, but I didn't pull up your bio ahead of time, so I might screw up some details here. So you're gonna have to cut me some slack if I misname one of your 10,000 awards that you've won. Yes, we are joined by Amal El-Mohtar, who is a lovely writer in Ottawa, Canada. She is an academic. She is a literary critic. She writes the Other Worlds or Otherworldly? Otherworldly column for the New York Times, reviews science fiction and fantasy books, and for the New York Times Book Review, I apologize, and is a multi-award-winning writer of short fiction and of co-author of the novella This Is How You Lose the Time War with Max Gladstone, another client of mine, another dear friend of both of us.
Yes. Very well done.
How was that?
That was excellent.
Okay.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. I did not go for the embarrassing amount of praise and start listing every award that you've won, both in previous years and this year so far. So
this year is nuts for it. Also, hello to someone else who's also in Ottawa. Hello, Kay. That's awesome. I always love to see other people from Ottawa.
Ottawa's really lovely. I've had the good fortune to be there a couple of times for CanCon last year, talking to your class the year before that, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, CanCon sadly canceled this year. Indeed. For sure, but that is all to the good, I think. Just want a quick check. Can you hear ambient noise going on here, or no?
I don't hear anything. Okay. So
cool. Yeah. Anyway, yes, thank you. I am a writer. I write mostly short fiction and criticism. The longest thing I've written to date is this half a novella with Max. And I feel like that's sort of like relevant to the way that we started working together. Because
let's just start there. So
like the origin story of our working together changes depending on who I'm talking to. But mostly I was aware of you as an agent at a time when I was like thinking I would quite like an agent, even though I didn't have like a novel to send around and stuff, which I had definitely like. I started selling short fiction in like 2006, I think. So in that like, God, it's been a long time. Like in that 10-year span, I guess, before we met, the wisdom was absolutely like, do not seek an agent until you have a novel length work to shop around and stuff. Like, there's just no point. They're not going to do anything for short fiction. They're not going to, like, it was kind of obvious that they wouldn't do anything for short fiction in terms of the money in short fiction being very small and definitely not enough to like split between two people in any way. So that seemed like a sort of no-brainer. But then, you know, you get to a point where you've written enough short stories and you're kind of like, is there something more like Disney princess kind of I want song or whatever? And I started like just becoming more aware of agents, partly because of like social.
What was that I want moment for you? Like, you know, if we're using the Disney metaphor here, like when did that flip for you? And what was the thing that you started thinking about? Like, oh, this is what I want an agent for. This is what I want them to do.
I think it was, I hit a point of thinking about, I'd like to put out a short story collection. I think that was the kind of base of it. And I actually started talking to other writers about that first, to be like, you know what, this is when actually another one of your clients, Christopher, oh God, why am I blanking?
Christopher Rowe.
Christopher Rowe. I was like, anyway, yes, Christopher Rowe and I were chatting at like WizCon or something, and he was like, I feel like a short story collection should have a coherent aesthetic argument, and I've never forgotten that phrase because it's just so great.
Yeah.
But
that's very
like,
Christopher as well. But
yeah,
yes.
and I mean his collections certainly do, and I was just kind of like aware of the fact that I did not feel like I had a coherent aesthetic argument. I've written a bunch of short stories that I liked. I think the other impetus was that I had won an award for a short story at this point. Like, I think I'd won the Locus Award for Truth About Owls. I think that it was like around Madeleine, I think. Stories of mine were getting nominated for awards in a way that they hadn't previously. And that was making me think that maybe the time has come to think about putting together a collection and also just like get guidance about what else to do in one's career and stuff like that. I knew I wanted to write novels eventually, but it seemed like a long way off. And it weirdly put me in a position of feeling very low stress about the whole thing, about like dealing with agents. Like a lot of my friends at this point, and for the like years or so around this decision, were on the agent hunt themselves. And there was definitely the sense of this really stark power imbalance of like, you have to, I mean, as much as the metaphors don't make it seem that way, like you have to hook an agent, you have to land an agent, and like a lot of weird fishing metaphors to do with agents. The sense was very much that you needed, it was like a ball and an agent wanted to dance with you or something like that. And that really, like, it's a whole dynamic that really put me off, and that I never, like, I never actually went on like a querying agents thing. And again, because I didn't have a novel to do it with, but also, so it just meant that whenever I was talking to agents at cons and stuff, I felt like, you're a person who does a job. That's like, you have no power over me. Like that was
all accurate statements, you know? And I think that's such a healthy way to look at it. Were a number of agents approaching you at this point? Did people start reaching out to you? Look, you know, what were those conversations like?
So I'd had,
and what worked and what didn't work. Like, what was compelling to you to hear from an agent, or what was off-putting to hear from an agent? When you say off-putting, I want you to name names and give as many distinguishing details as possible.
I mean, you say that, but I sort of feel like I could do that at this point. I don't know if there's any point anymore in being.
I would generous. Still not.
Yeah.
Even though I know 100% who you're talking about, but yes.
Yeah. Well, so So there were, I think I'd had serious conversations with 2 agents at this point. One of them,
I would also like to point out what just happened right there is proper agenting, where you keep your client from jumping off of a cliff for no good reason.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you're very good at that.
Anyways, continue. I'm sorry.
All good. So I'd been approached by 2 agents. No, sorry. Well, so I'd had serious conversations with 2 agents. One that I had sought out because of being recommended by one of their clients, and also just like someone else who dealt with that client and who said like that we might be a good fit and stuff like that. So we had a conversation which I was extremely unprepared for. And the way I was extremely unprepared for it was that they asked, so, whose career do you want, as one of the questions in this conversation. And I started naming like people whose writing I liked, which was because I had no idea, I hadn't thought in those terms. Like I hadn't thought about like other writers in terms of the arc of their careers. I'd thought of them in terms of myself as a reader consuming their writing. So I was unprepared for it. I also felt sort of like, so, there's like a moment in a conversation where you realize someone is just kind of waiting for it to be over and stuff. So it was not a great experience, but I felt like I had still gained something from it. Like just recognize that there was a caliber of conversation that, or not even caliber, but just like concerns in a conversation that I was being asked about that clearly had weeded me out of the way that this person worked. The second person
she was testing you in a way that I often test potential clients in terms of what's your business savvy and what's your commitment to this as a career. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not that like you failed that interaction in some way, right? It was just more of like, it's that thing that you test to check where somebody's at in their thought process and in their career. No,
absolutely. And I mean, I felt a little crestfallen from it because I totally felt like, until you and I had conversations about it, I totally felt like I had failed some kind of secret test that I didn't thoroughly understand. But in retrospect, I totally appreciated it. The other instance of being actually pursued by someone was very off-putting and weird because this was someone who I was like socially acquainted with at cons, and who basically who'd been very generous in terms of like time and conversations to talk about things like, how does one put together short story collections, things like just like some logistical basic stuff, and was very gregarious and generally just kind of a decent person to talk to. But there came a point where he started to the more he clearly wanted to work with me, the more he tried to make extravagant gestures about like, let me do this thing for you. Let me like buy you plane tickets to attend this convention that I'm going to be at. Let me get you tickets to Hamilton. That I was like, and it was just, it felt super gross and weird because I was like, I don't work for you. I don't work with you. Like this is some kind of weird bribe situation where, and the key thing was he never actually talked about my work. Like he never talked about like what he saw on my work or what kind, like it felt very much like I was being courted in a gross way. And also it was someone who made me feel like, the diversity boxes I ticked were sort of the thing that he was after more than the things that I was writing. So don't do that.
So I think
don't do that, guys.
2 things really stand out to me about that interaction, right? One is, one thing I'm looking for in a client, but also I think writers are looking for in an agent is good boundaries. You know what I mean? Like the baseline of just understanding what your role is and understanding, where that ends and where, someone else's professional life begins, right?
Yeah.
Like, and, over time, you and I have built up a personal friendship in addition to our professional one. But initially, when you're reaching out to a writer, you can't muddy those lines too much or be aggressively weird about it in this case. And then the other thing is, especially when you're talking to a writer from a marginalized background, whatever that background is, we all want lists that show a certain amount of diversity, that show a range of things. Or many of us do. I don't know about all. Clearly, some people don't care. But you can't present that as the first and foremost thing, right? That always remember that you're talking to a writer because they're a writer, right? And that is the primary reason for your interaction. And when you lose sight of that, I think that's when those conversations really start going off the rails, which isn't to say that you can't talk about other stuff. I mean, I think our first lunch meeting, we mostly just talked about food. We talked about fiction for a little bit, but we talked about, diaspora and food largely.
We talked about food and diaspora and immigration. Yeah.
Right. But that came out of a conversation about one of your stories, Madeleine, because, that did play into that and into memory and food in all these different ways. And, that remains one of my favorite stories of yours. So I think that was what, 2015 that we had that conversation? 2016. Yeah.
It was World Fantasy.
Okay.
Yeah, it was Columbus. I mean, I remember this specifically because, the election happened.
It was Columbus 2016. Right, exactly. I remember that timeline as being longer, but it was pretty quick because we had met very briefly at World Fantasy 2015.
I will tell you the full timeline of our interactions. We met the first time at Confusion in, I'm pretty sure we met Confusion 2016 for the first time. And
no, we met at World Fantasy 2015 because I was hanging out with Nava a bunch that year, and that was up in Saratoga.
Oh,
and you and Max went off to do your sword photo shoot. And so I met you at that point. But again, it was super brief. It was literally just an introduction. We didn't have a real conversation then.
Exactly.
So that said, I am mortified that you don't remember our first interaction. And this relationship is
I totally remember the first interaction. I forgot which con it was at because I do remember Nava being there.
No,
I remember like from the sidelines. This was actually, I don't know how relevant this is to any other agents, but I totally remember that like both Nava and Dominique Parisien were like both rooting for us to work together and like trying to sort of like matchmake from behind the scenes and stuff. But anyway, yeah. So we met very briefly at that World Fantasy. We met briefly at Confusion in 2016, and then and we'd been talking online a bunch. Like I remember the first time that the first time that I think I started talking to you on the internet was literally because you posted a photo of your Le Creuset pot in use, and I was like, "That's a real nice pot," and we just like started talking again. Food. It's great. Yep. It's such a good pot. I'm so still covetous of it. But the point is that like we talked about food a lot and food as a touchstone for the things that we're actually concerned about with our work. And I felt like that was a really organic progression. The other thing that was happening at the same time was, I mean, I was interested in talking to you because you were representing friends of mine who I knew had similar concerns to me in terms of like, how do even either write novel and or not feel like your background is commodity, which on some level it's that horrible thing where you kind of recognize that in some situations, in some contexts, your background is a commodity, but you don't want to be made to feel that way when you're talking to
it. Shouldn't be front and center, right? It shouldn't be the centerpiece of the conversation. It is a factor, right? The fact that you are coming from a marginalized background or a non white cis mainstream voice background, right? Was interesting to me, but it wasn't interesting to me as a marketing point. It was interesting to me because you were writing from a perspective that I hadn't seen before. And that made the fiction feel fresh and engaging, right? The reason I like working with people from different backgrounds is because that fiction is just more exciting to me because it either resonates with my personal experience or is feels different in a way that is fresh in the marketplace, and I think will have a big impact in the marketplace, right? So there is a commercial component, but the commercial component isn't a check mark, right? It isn't a checklist. It's something that's core to the fiction because, good writing is about, perspective and history and identity, and therefore someone who has a different set of those is going to have interesting things to say, in my opinion, more often than not. So I think you really, just to speak to my end of it, came onto my radar really for two reasons. One was at the time, I had become an agent in summer of 2015. So it was pretty early days for me. And one of my early strategies, and I've mentioned this on other shows, was really to pick up very talented short fiction writers and sort of scoop them up before other people really got to them, or before they were at that stage where they had full novels, and then it was going to be a feeding frenzy, right? And there were a couple other people who had a similar idea, but I was getting pretty lucky and had a pretty good track record in that space. So I was definitely keeping my eye out for stuff. And then 2015, you were nominated for Nebula, maybe.
God,
or maybe it was just because of Truth About Owls from the previous year, which is 2014, right? Or 2013?
Yeah,
even?
I think that's what it was. I think oh God, I'm so sorry. I should probably have a better list of this.
No. Yeah. I mean, it's you were on my you were on my radar because of awards, and I knew you'd been nominated for stuff. Also, I had friends, Nava included, who were singing your praises to me, but also you were just tweeted into my feed constantly. I kept seeing this person crop up and I was like, who is this person? And sometimes that really works. Sometimes it was your sort of online identity and presence on Twitter that also kind of made me think, oh, this person's cool, I'd like to work with this person, because we would have conversations about food and things like that. So I was talking about branding last week, and having those hobbies, having those other things that you talk about online can be really useful. I've gotten several clients that way. I have another client who we would just talk about tools and building stuff. And then one day they DM me and were like, hey, I have the graphic novel proposal. Do you want to work together? And I was like, yeah, great, let's do it.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, having those things to talk about online and just gives you hooks for other people to hook into, right? Or it just gives that opportunity to have a real conversation that isn't just, shop talk, right? And so that made it so when we finally did have that lunch at World Fantasy in Columbus, we not only had the stuff to talk about your fiction, because I'd read your short stories and really loved them, although funnily enough, I had not read Truth About Owls, and I only read Truth About Owls last year. It was a very long time before I read that. It's a wonderful story. I love it very much. Actually, I don't even think I read it. I listened to it when LeVar Burton did it on his podcast. That's how I finally was exposed to the Truth About Owls. Anyways, admitting stuff I shouldn't admit.
That's fine. It's all good.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that, from your perspective, you started thinking about looking for an agent. And from my perspective, I was, there's no way to say this without it sounding a little creepy, but I'd sort of, you had caught my attention and I was targeting you as somebody who's like, oh, I want to work this person. And, I think we both did this thing where we started building our social circles. And we've talked about this before, about how we were kind of circling each other, kind of like wolves, you know what I mean? And, I think we were checking references, right? Talking to mutual friends, about this person. What do you think about this person? Would they be good to work with? Those kind of things. And, from my end, at least, there was only insanely rave reviews. And, I think our mutual friend Nava literally just shoving both of us into the same conversation. And
it was also mutual, I have to say. It was I only heard positive things about you as well. I mean, the closest thing from my end that came to anything that wasn't wild praise was that you were really new on the scene at this point. Well, sort of. I mean, again, you'd had that.
I wasn't new on the scene, but I was new as an agent. I just sort of popped back on the scene in 2015. So
exactly. I think it was that you were still that there that thing of the time delay between signing people and their work coming out and that sort of thing.
Right.
So, but in terms of everyone who worked with you or who just had any interaction with you, was the same thing. And the thing that I came away from our conversation from that first lunch, the things that I came away from were that I really wanted to work with you because I wanted to keep on having these kinds of conversations. For a few reasons. One of the things that you also talked about during that conversation was that you were more interested in signing people for their careers than for a single project, which was exciting to me to hear as someone who just kind of wrote a bunch of stuff and had a sense of I had a sense of how, like, I had a sense of what was important to me and what was driving my fiction, but it didn't mean that I only wanted to write one genre, or that I only wanted to write those kinds of things. Like, I mean, but the previous conversation I alluded to with a different agent made me feel like, you know what, the career that I want is like Neil Gaiman's career. I want to write whatever the hell I want, and I want you to sell whatever I write. And that just felt like, like that is, and I want to make a lot of money doing it.
And it's funny, there's multiple types of writers out there, right? And there's certain writers who I work with, and it's very much, you should write this series, you should focus in this genre, you're very good at this one thing, like double down on that channel. And then there's other writers where it's like, oh, you are going to do something, I don't know what that thing is, right? And especially in your case, you're working on your PhD at the time, you were very upfront about that, you had only written short fiction. Like, I went into that conversation knowing and expecting it was going to be years before you had a full-length project. And then, of course, you surprised me with this novella that you wrote.
Which you
tell me about how that process. Did you and Max tell me about that before you started working on it? I don't think so. I think you came back from that retreat.
Yeah, like
you guys just showed up with a full thing.
Yeah, so the timeline of us writing Time War was that summer. So the summer of 2016 was when we wrote most of it. At That World Fantasy, where you and I had lunch, we were.
You'd written it before you and I started working. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. And so we were, and Max wasn't your client yet, right? So so this was just like a project.
I don't think I signed Max till 2017.
Yeah, till I think
because it was after Confusion 2017. So
exactly. And I mean, I don't think it would be wrong to say that a part of why Max was looking at a few people at that time, and I think part of one of the considerations, I will not take any kind of credit for this, but one of the considerations was that you were my agent and that we were working on this project together, and it would make a lot of things easier if we had the same agent. But anyway, we ended up finishing Time War in December of 2016. But we had almost finished it when you and I met. So, and at the time, I can't remember at what point I told you about it. It was probably our first post we are now working together conversation. And I was like, yeah, we've got this.
Because you didn't tell me about it when we had that lunch, right? Maybe you mentioned vaguely you're working on a project, but
yeah,
I don't think you pitched the concept to me.
No, I don't think I pitched anything to you at that lunch. We were just
I don't think so.
We were just eating and talking, and it was
I think we got really derailed really quickly.
Yes, it was I was just enjoying talking to you so much. I remember there being a lull in the conversation where we both were like, "Should we be talking about work?" and and I was trying to find a way to organically bring that in, and it was instead I don't know, drag. Anyway, but the point is that I'm pretty sure that when we talked to you about it, it was a little bit. I mean, it was we had finished it. We had sent it to you. I think I'm trying to remember this timeline. It's so pointless for the purposes of this.
Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't exactly matter. I was just curious more than anything else.
I'm pretty sure it was that we sent it to you and told you about it, and you were really uncertain because it was I hate time travel stories and I hate epistolary stories, and then you read it and you liked it, and then the rest was history. But yeah.
And so for those on the stream who may not be familiar with it, this is a co-written novella between Amal and Max Lassen, who we mentioned. It is about two rival agents from different timelines writing each other letters. So it is. There you go. It is purely an epistolary time travel book, and as Amal stated accurately, I don't like time travel. I often find it to be a frustrating device. And I think epistolary is very hard to make commercial and to find an audience. And, I was proven very wrong, much to my great delight in this case. And do you remember how we were trying to
but anyway, sorry,
figure out how to pitch this thing? Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was just saying, and now lesbians are picking each other up on like the apps with quotes from this book, which makes me the happiest I could ever be.
Yes.
But anyway, sorry, how we talked about pitching this.
Because we didn't have a title, right? We were just calling it Red versus Blue at that point, which
yes.
Was not a good even working title.
My working title for it was These Violent Delights, I think, because it was a Shakespeare quote, and Max didn't like it because he was like, that's too romance, and I was like, no, it's not, it's got the word violent in it. And then a romance novel with that title came out like a month later, and I was like, god damn it.
Amazing.
We went through like so I mean, in terms, I don't remember us having that many conversations about how to pitch it, because there were already interested parties, right? Like, I don't know if...
Well, I mean, there were people who liked your work, right? And so ultimately, I spent a lot of time agonizing about comps and whatever, and I think, I don't remember what I used. I used Griffin and Sabine for sure, which was, this big hit in the 90s that was, this beautifully designed book of letters. Yeah, I mean, it's great. I remember reading it sort of as a kid. I don't know why as a child I was reading this thing, but it was great. But it was the only like big epistolary project I could think of, or I could find. And then some time travel thing that I can't remember what we used. But it was like all these different concerns, right? Like I wanted to avoid Doctor Who as a reference, which was funny that we then put Time War in the title. But I was trying to like keep it out of all these different territories and like thread this needle in terms of how we pitched it. But then ultimately it didn't really matter because the pitch just came down to, here's award-winning writer Amal, here is celebrated and beloved writer Max, and they wrote this thing together. And we were able just to push you two forward as part of the pitch and then just let the book stand on its merits in a way that was very compelling. That said, it was an odd little project to sell because it was a novella. And we did send it to Tor.com, which was one of the few places that was really publishing novellas in book form. But I had the idea of, well, Tor.com's really proven that this works. If they want it, great, we can have that conversation. And I think they would have done a great job with it. But I also wanted to see if other people would bite. And, ultimately, Simon & Schuster did. Nava, who I mentioned earlier, was very much a matchmaker in this professional relationship, then ended up acquiring the book for Saga and doing a wonderful job with it there. So
yeah, it was but so the funny thing that's come out of that, I think, is that now Max and I are a kind of working unit together. I think like that we have like our separate work that we're doing, but it also feels like we are a kind of author fusion who you are also representing in other ways.
A Max.
I totally this is so dumb, but I love it so much. Like I have totally in the past been like, what would our secret pseudonym be that is like a mix of our respective names? And I totally thought like,
well, Max and I have a running joke. Oh yeah. Max
like,
and I have a running joke about one day he's going to write like a very center of market Dungeons and Dragons style epic fantasy, and we're going to publish it under the name Glax Badstone.
Yes! Oh my god! Glax Badstone. There's the one of like the side of us that writes more kind of fun actiony things is A.M. Gladstar, and then the one who is
Gladstar.
Yeah, the one who's like more serious literary, David Foster Wallace-y. I say that not having read any David Foster Wallace, is like M.A. Mostone. And it's just like, I don't know, there's anyway, but a Max is also fine. A Max is good. Yes. But I was going to say about that too, in terms of other stuff that I didn't, there's so much about working with you that so, I mean, we've talked a lot about how we came to work together, but in terms of how we work together now, there's been so much that I genuinely never wanted, like never actually dreamt of that I am doing now. Like things like writing for TV, which I that was never a thing I wanted to do. It was just it was like that, and like writing for stage and theater and stuff. There are things that I just consumed very readily and had never in a million years thought that I would write for or in. And like Time War got optioned for TV, and part of that deal was Max and me writing the screenplay for the pilot, and so we've like had that experience, and now like we're thinking of adapting other work and doing that sort of thing. But you've also, like, talking about the short story stuff, like you've also been optioning my short stories for film and television and stuff like that, which is also something that in the shop talkingness of the 10 to 15 years that I had acquiring an education about how one is a writer in SF in North America in these times, was just not something that was at all on my radar either. And and I feel like so much of us working together has been you finding ways to make me think of my writing slightly differently, or like to like make me realize that there are things that I can do and that I can enjoy doing, and that that might actually also feed the other work that I do. Like I also
yeah, it's funny because I've talked a number of times about me picking up short fiction writers early, and in some ways that was very tactical for me out of the gate, in terms of I wanted to build a list and start having that identity that people would know me for working with certain people, and picking up people who were like kind of hot in the market at that point in time, or people were really talking about them or winning awards. Like it put me in sort of a buzzier slot as well by association, right? The thing that I wasn't expecting that actually has been really wonderful is how much I've gotten out of being able to work with people at that early stage in their career, of helping them figure out what do they want to write, how are they going to write, finding those other opportunities. Film rights for short stories became a really big deal. Maybe it's a rival's fault, maybe it's something else. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, film and TV for short fiction became very hot area and very profitable area. But also, I think Time War really taught me that you don't know what's going to happen a lot of the time. And sometimes you just have to be open to that possibility and start working with someone early, and then help them develop their career. And you can sort of keep people from making early errors as a result. Or writing that first novel that's just so out of a marketable slot. I don't know. It's been really interesting from my end, working with you and a couple other people like you at that early stage to really figure some of that stuff out.
Well, the thing that I it's really interesting to be in this position of like ostensibly addressing people who want to be agents and stuff, because I often wonder like if the things that you do for your clients are normal or like typical for agents.
I mean, even I don't know, right? To some extent, the way that we work together, and also the way I work with you, is often very different from the way I would work with another client, right? Depending on how you communicate what you need and all those things.
Well, one thing I'm thinking of specifically is just like how generative I find our conversations, like that. And this partly comes of us having similar interests in a lot of things and stuff. But I never went into the idea of having an agent with the idea that the agent would be simultaneously someone off of whom I can like bounce and workshop ideas, and someone who, or expected that an agent would read my manuscript, not necessarily that they would edit the manuscript, or that, but specifically like the fact that I feel like whenever we get the opportunity to have a long conversation, I leave it really energized and wanting to work on things and looking at things slightly differently. Or the fact that because you are so interested in media and stuff, that sometimes, the media that you direct me to and stuff will lead to kind of these like Florences of just like ways that I want to approach things and difference and stuff like that. So, and I don't know, I mean, the thing that I genuinely don't know is how much of that is our actual friendship, and how much of that is something that one can expect of an agent, and I know that lots of people have different styles, and for a lot of people this is not going to be like, the thing that I hesitate about is like the takeaway of this being all of you become friends with your clients or whatever. Like that seems like actually, a terrible takeaway, but I don't know.
It is a terrible takeaway, but I am also really curious if you're comfortable talking about this in some ways, like how you and I manage the boundaries between what is a personal friendship between the two of us and what is our working relationship as well, right? Because we do get along. We have plenty of conversations that aren't about work. You visited me in Portland with Stu, and then I visited you in Ottawa. Like, there's been like, we do have this really lovely personal relationship, and that's very common among agents and writers, where they do develop that because you're working together pretty closely. You're working together on, stuff that's really important to the writer, right? Books are very close to the writer's heart in a lot of ways. And so it makes sense to me that editors and authors, agents and authors develop these friendships that can be pretty important to that relationship. But I'm just curious if you have thoughts about like where those lines are for you. What there have been ways in which that you've had to actively manage that or be concerned about that, or has it just been purely natural?
I feel like on a very like,
or unconscious, I guess is what I meant.
I feel like there's a kind of basic logistical level where I feel like the conversations we have on Signal are friends, and the conversations we have like in the Slack are business. Even though we have a lot of conversations in the Slack that are nonsense, like, but if it's a Slack DM, I feel, or like, Slack private channel stuff, then I feel like that is our business thing. And if it's email, then that is our business thing. But if it's,
I feel like there is a hierarchy where email is the most formal or important. And then maybe phone call, but and then Slack, and then Signal is the most we're just fooling around and like talking about some TV show we watched or some game or something like that.
Using cat stickers. But like,
exactly.
But oh god, the hierarchy of cat stickers, the which one is definitely important. Anyway, but no, there's definitely, I think the phone calls fall into an interesting place because I guess there's a difference too between like, action items versus nebulous generative space stuff. Action items are always like email, but I feel like in our phone conversations, we can be having those phone conversations for a number of reasons. They can be to like, discuss a possible business thing, or they can be to like process feelings around a thing, or they can just be things that are quite sensitive and that blur boundaries and that need, a voice to actually discuss. For me anyway, because I am one of those rare millennials who actually really loves talking on the phone. And
likewise.
I prefer it as like when I want to feel like I'm talking to a whole person, I want to talk on the phone. So,
I find phone especially useful for editorial things or strategy things, right? Because typing all that stuff out just gets exhausting at some point. But those are sensitive conversations that intonation becomes really important. So if we're brainstorming career concepts or we're brainstorming about, an editorial thing, those are cases where I find having that little bit more personal connection of the phone conversation is so useful. And so it's just so much easier to have that conversation there and in that way. So
exactly. So I feel like it is like phone calls are the ones where I feel like the friendship and business are most sort of just blended. Like they're not working against each other. They're kind of feeding each other because there are, I don't know, there are just some things that in their sensitivity, it's easier to process them knowing that they are coming from like a friendly place and stuff as well. But other than that, I feel like I don't know. It's sort of intuitive. Like I feel like I'm often motivated by, like I feel like because we are good friends, it makes me want to instinctively check myself before I ask something sometimes. Like, I want to be very clear with myself about whether or not I'm impinging on a professional boundary and stuff. But like that feels like it's motivated by the friendship. So like, and in a way that I guess it's weird. It's like simultaneously, it's the reason why I need to gut check that sometimes with myself, but it's also the motivation behind gut checking. Because if we weren't friends, I would just it would be a lot simpler, I guess. I would only be
it's a complexity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And there have been a couple cases where I've backed off of a developing friendship because I had the sense that that was not something that I or the other person could manage well in that case. And those are people who I have wonderful working relationships with generally. So anyways, it's a tricky topic in a lot of ways, right? Because it is about those boundaries and it is about what is personal and what is professional, which is a complicated topic in a creative industry. And but most creative industries sort of have that component to them. And I think navigating that is, especially for a young agent, especially for people who are getting into this, figuring out how to balance that is so important and a real challenge. But also, it can be hugely generative for the relationship too, and for creatively as well, right? Like, I'm excited to hear that our conversations lead into new ideas for you, and those also lead to new opportunities, right? Sometimes I'll be just kicking around something with a client, and then suddenly we're like, oh, wait, hang on, this is actually a project. Or wait, what if we pitch this as an essay or something like that? And that can be just really exciting and, lead to those specific opportunities, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing the questions coming in, by the way?
I am seeing the questions coming in. I'm trying to think if there's any one last thing I want to hit on before we dive into the questions.
Sure.
You might not have an answer to this one, or it might be a tricky one to answer. But I'm curious. Like, what are the things that you, as one of my clients, find frustrating about the process, or wish was going different? I mean, this isn't necessarily like you giving me a performance review and like we should do this differently or whatever. But everyone has their own way of handling things. Everyone has their own process. Everyone has their own different things. So I'm curious from your perspective, like, if you were to suddenly get a new agent, if I got hit by a bus and you were like, I need to find a new agent, I definitely want one that doesn't do this thing. You know what I mean? Do you have clarity on what that is?
God. This is such a hard question because I don't want to contemplate your
I'm choosing
demise.
to believe that you're cackling with delight at the image of me getting hit by a bus, but I don't think that's what's happening.
I don't like that. I don't like this. I mean, my God. So
if you don't have an answer to one, it's fine. This is a weird question, but yeah.
I guess it's just, I mean, so much of it comes from like the kind of bad agency situations that I skirted before, where like I mean, so it's a difficult question to answer because I feel so I didn't want to do this. I was totally like going to just sass you relentlessly during this conversation, and now instead I'm gonna like talk in a really heartfelt way about how I
really pitched this online of you that you were gonna sass me. You've done very little sassing in there. You're really disappointing the fans here.
So sorry. Just have me on again, and I will pretend to be Seth more. But no. No, so like the thing is that I feel like I have seen so many friends go through really bad agent situations, and so I have a lot of a sense of like what a dysfunctional client-agent relationship looks like, where where a client doesn't is afraid of talking to their agent, or doesn't trust what their agent says, or is constantly second guessing advice that their agent gives them because they haven't sold anything in 2 years, or like I don't know, like there are just all sorts of situations where like even and this is not to say that the agents themselves are bad, but just like the relationship is a bad fit for a lot of people. I've seen people having to break up with their agents for various reasons and stuff. So and every time I find myself in this position of like, God, I feel really lucky. How did this happen? Like because I didn't, like, I feel in so many ways like I cheated because I didn't query, I didn't like go looking for a bunch of different agents. I was like, no, this is this one. I want this one. And then we just started working together, and that was and that's been nothing but great for me. In terms of things that I would not like, one thing that I really appreciate about our relationship as well is that there's I don't do super well with a specific kind of pressure that just ends up making me like like a lot of writers cycle through depression and anxiety and stuff, and there's a certain kind of pressure or expectation that just makes me extremely avoidant, and I don't feel like we've actually had to navigate that, because you've actually like, again, probably intuitively just not made me feel that pressure. Sometimes I have felt like,
I would say it hasn't been intuitive, actually. It's been something I've thought about quite a bit, actually.
Okay, awesome, great.
And one thing that is important to me, because I do work with a very wide range of writers, is thinking about what are the best ways to motivate this person and get them focused and keep them on track for a project. And sometimes that is, hey, you owe me this thing by this date, where is it? And sometimes that is giving someone the space and time to figure that out. With you, I think, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't call it out, so you'll start observing it, but it's a lot of sort of subtle nudges, right? Like just checking in on a concept or asking about how a certain thing is going and things like that, in ways that hopefully feel supportive, because that's the goal, but are still keeping it at least somewhere in your head that this is a project that you want to work on, that you are excited about doing this thing. For me, it's more about reminding you of your enthusiasm rather than trying to convince you to do something or push you into doing something, which, I guess it is, my instinct would not have been a productive path. Right.
Yeah. I mean, and this is actually exactly it. Like when I say that I come away from our conversations really energized, I mean, this is part of it. I think the other thing is that a thing that you do that I appreciate, even when I end up like having existential crises as a consequence of them, is that
how many existential crises have I given you in our time working together?
3. At least 3 that I can think of off the top of my head.
Good, yeah.
It's gonna be 4 years this October.
Yeah, it will be 4 years this November. Yeah.
But but sometimes, like, what I really appreciate, sometimes, so like, because I have a lot of jobs, and like I teach at a university, I'm still, for my sins, finishing a PhD. I'm working for I freelance for the New York Times Book Review and stuff like that. Sometimes it feels
like, and you're a screenwriter now, and
I'm a
you've done comics work,
now.
Like all these different things, right? Like,
because of that, but like the non fiction writing things specifically, sort of make it feel sometimes like when you drop in like one of those kind of nudges or things like that, it sort of feels like a fairy godparent kind of coming in and being like, behold, you too could write fiction full time, and stuff like that, if you would just choose to do that. And I don't know why I gave you that accent, but anyway, it's a thing that I appreciate, because sometimes I need the reminder. Like sometimes I get really caught up in just a grind of things that are not fiction, and that you have a really sensitive like approach to making me feel good about remembering those things instead of guilty about remembering those things, and that's really valuable to me, where a lot of the stuff happens in my head, and anywho.
I mean, that's good to hear. I mean, yeah,
I like you a lot. You're a good agent.
I like you a lot. I like working with you. This is great. Okay, we've got embarrassing and anyways, let's do questions to mediate our feelings. Um, okay, so this one from Woo Woo. The figuring out the business savvy part of your client is interesting. Could you elaborate on what's the consideration on the expected working relationship if the client is very low business savvy? I definitely work with some people who are pretty low on the business savvy front, and that's not necessarily a problem, right? The reason I'm trying to figure that out is I'm trying to figure out what our relationship is going to be and how that's going to work. There have been cases where I've been if I'm in the bubble about somebody in terms of how to work with them, how to market their books, what my vision is here, and then I get the sense that they don't have a strong vision themselves, then that can sort of push me off the fence into a no, or push me off the fence into a yes if they are very focused and very savvy about those things. Most of the people I work with tend to be pretty savvy and pretty excited about the business side of things. I think naturally you can tell from the way I talk about this that I think about the business a lot and I think about the strategy of the business a lot. And I like talking those things through with my clients as well. So, for me, having that business savviness is often important, but it's not determinate. I don't know. What about you? How did you feel about you mentioned being asked that question and not knowing how to answer it initially. By the time you and I started talking and working together, where did you feel like you were falling on that savviness?
I think I was. I think at the time I thought I was a lot more savvy than I was, and I think that excuse me. I think that actually one of the things, and I think I've said this to you before, one of the things that I really appreciate about our relationship, and it's like the fact that it's the same reason that I enjoy watching this stream, even though I'm a writer and it should be verboten for me. It's that I really love learning what the business looks like from not a writer's perspective, from literally anyone else's perspective, from talking to Nava about what it was like to be an editor at a at a traditional house. When I previously had mostly only talked to editors at small presses and stuff like that. Just every angle on the business feels like I learn so much more about just so much more about what my position is in that whole circuitry, basically. So I'm not going to actually talk about it, but we had a conversation once about a book that I picked up in a big box store, and I was mocking the cover, and it turned out that you had edited it.
It was one of my books. That's right, from back when I was an editor. That's right.
And the thing about it was, I was totally going to be but this looks like shit. And you were like, this is sold over 1 million copies. Okay. And I was like, oh, because that's your job. Your job is to sell millions of copies, not to make good art. Oh, sorry. And that was so shitty of me. I'm sorry. That was awful. Anyway.
No. I mean, actually, that I didn't read that as shitty at all, because it's very accurate. My job isn't to make good art. My job is most exciting to me when good art also sells 1 million copies, right?
I meant your job as an editor in this case,
Also, that was a book that was in translation. I did literally no editing on it, right? Okay. It was a German book that was translated into English and then sold 1 billion copies here and in Germany. And so, I had no creative horse in that race other than I was like, yeah, that cover works. It's a yelling fantasy thing, and it did beautifully. But yes, anyways, continue.
No, that's the thing. So anyway, just recognizing that those two things could be different, that they the conversations that you and I have, because we both really like things that we think of as I just super don't want to open the can of worms about what art is and stuff. My critic hat is but just that
we could do a whole other hour on just commerce versus art, right? You and I think have a lot of thoughts on that topic. But
exactly, and that's the thing. I don't want to reduce that to just a throwaway joke, because it is actually a really complicated conversation. But it was a real just eye-opening moment of just how little I as a writer understood what went into the mechanics of publishing, essentially, and I really appreciated that. So, and I feel the more we work together, the more of a sense of that I get. I'm still extremely happy to leave that side to you and to just like trust the things that you do with it. But that trust is not incompatible for me with learning more and like just enjoying that learning more and bringing that knowledge to our interactions. Like the time on this very stream where you talked about how you like take a crowbar to your clients' traumas, crack it open in order to get more books. And
you brought that up a couple times over the past month or so.
It stayed with me. It was like, oh my God, it's what he's doing. But then, like, you know, not in a sinister way, in a kind of like, it's really neat to understand what it looks like from your perspective. And I just like appreciate that.
Do you mind staying on a few minutes more to answer a couple more questions?
Yeah,
you gotta go.
I do not have a heart out,
okay.
So yeah.
Great. Likewise. Okay, from Alessandra, our good friend Alessandra Meacham. Do either of you specifically call out this is a friendship thing or this is a business thing? I don't know whether you and I do that specifically, Amal. I definitely have other clients of mine where we will be like, actually, you know, I think because you and I have the different communication channels that we use, it makes it easier to have that separation. I have other people who we only use one channel really for, I don't know, whatever, lack of confusion reasons in other ways. But that is a case where we will explicitly be like, this is a work thing, personal thing, work thing, you know. So there's certain cases where that can be really useful. But I don't know. I think it depends on the circumstance too.
Yeah, I feel like, I think that without using those specific tags, sometimes we do that, but usually they're like, I don't know, I feel like they, how can I put this? That they tend more to be, I think that
I know when we do it, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Like they just, there are, I think few and far between are the moments where those need to be differentiated. I think sometimes. So, but because I imagine like the time when you need differentiation in those areas is where there's conflict, where like you're anticipating conflict of some kind, and you want to make sure that the conflict is going to be a business conflict versus a friend conflict, and I feel like our differentiation, like I feel like the friendship and business don't tend to interact as much in conflicty areas, so it's easier to separate them, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, which is why I think when we actually do explicitly do it, it's when we're calling out that we're talking shit in a professional way or talking shit in a personal way about a book or a person. You know what I mean? I think you know, that has definitely been a thing where we've been like, I'm going to tell you about my feelings about this person, but this isn't a work thing. This is just how I feel as a human about this person versus like, oh, that person is professionally trash or that book is trash for this reason. Right. We would never say such cruel things about a person or a book. Never.
No.
Okay.
Next question.
Mark, if an author has multiple agents who express interest in a manuscript once it is completed, what is the best way to go about that for both the author and the agents? We've alluded to this in the past. The unfortunate term of art for this situation is a beauty contest, right? Where multiple agents are trying to attract a specific writer and work with that writer. So the best process for me, the way I like to see this go down is the writer sets the rules, right? The writer says, you know, I'm going to take 2 weeks to talk to everybody, consider my decisions, and then come back to you at that point. And then what usually happens over the course of that time, whether it's 5 days, 2 days, 2 weeks, whatever it is you know, having a number of phone calls with the individual agents and then talking about what issues are important to them, right? And, you know, if you're on the author side, for me, or my concept of that is coming up with that list of questions that are really important to you, figuring out how you want to work with your agent, what's important to you about what that agent is good at, figuring out your personal priorities, and then as an agent, figuring out, you know, how much you want to work with this person, how can you convince this person, how do you communicate what is accurate about how you work. And then for me, it comes down to being incredibly honest about my strengths and my weaknesses, my process and my communication styles, because the worst case is you convince someone to go with you and it turns out to be a bad fit, or not worst case, but you know, that is something that I really want to be careful about. I want to make sure it's really clear who I am and how I work, so that that author can make an informed decision. And if they choose someone else, that is fair enough. Usually they choose Seth because he's a jerk. But no, just kidding. But I mean, I think it's a really important process. I think honesty and clarity, both for you examining yourself and communicating that to the other party, is the thing that leads to a good outcome there. Amal, do you have thoughts on this from your brief experience in this situation, or? I mean, this feels more like a query question, but
yeah,
you did
exactly. I did not have a query process. I know from friends who have that what you described feels like the thing that is most like fair, essentially. I mean, ultimately, I know that from the author side of things, sometimes there's a lot of anxiety around, oh no, will someone lose interest if I don't reply fast enough, or if I, how do I maintain all of this interest and stuff like that? So just being really clear about that and about what the idea is that you're going to work together for a long time, ideally, right? So you do want everything to just be on the table right away.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. Maria, thinking about friendships you pump the brakes on, is it because a friendship would undermine an agent-client relationship somehow, as opposed to making it stronger, more productive like this one? I think for me, when that has happened, it has been about a sense of that person's ability, or maybe even my ability. I don't know. It's unfair to put that on one person, but that boundaries were tough to maintain there in certain ways, or certain expectations. Whether somebody was assuming because we were friendly that they would get more attention and more care than other clients of mine, or something along those lines. And when I phrase it like that, it sounds bad. I don't think it was these circumstances. I don't think there was like bad intent or malice or anything like that in those. I think it's just about understanding how good are you at that dance that Mal and I were describing earlier, about understanding when this is business versus when this is personal, what the expectations are. The fact that we do have a personal relationship doesn't mean that the business relationship is going to be substantively different. As a result, it can be generative in the way that we've talked about, but it doesn't get you special treatment from me in terms of time or attention or priority or any of those things. I'm sure there is some subtle bias that comes into that, right? It's impossible to work that out. But it's not a very active thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have a thought on that before I move on, or?
No, I don't. I mean, what I will say from my end is that I genuinely did not go into our relationship expecting a friendship. It was a really, and I did not have in my head an idea that I needed to be friends with whoever my agent was going to be. I wanted to have a working relationship where we could communicate with each other really clearly, where we could just be very honest about things and talk regularly and stuff like that. But I extremely did not expect that we would become as good friends as we have. And I feel really grateful that we have. And I feel like, I do feel like it makes our business relationship better and stronger. But it was not conditional on my part that our agent client relationship be like infused with our friendship. I just wanted us to hang out at cons and stuff. And we accidentally became really good friends.
It has been a very nice bonus for sure. Alexandra, again, both of you talk about how much you value those personal relationships, friendships. Can you talk about the business relationships where that isn't a thing? Amal, you said it's maybe less complicated. For my part, those definitely are less. I mean, they are and they aren't, right? You don't have that layer of having to navigate that, but the primary challenges are business challenges in those relationships. So in that way, it is no less complicated because you're still navigating publishing, you're still trying to market books, sell books, manage careers. All those challenges are still present, whether or not you are personal friends or not. So for me, I guess it is less complicated because you're not juggling that other layer, but that other layer is so much just about having a friendship that I don't know.
I will say like the things that come to mind for me are like I have a huge amount of respect for my editors at the New York Times Book Review, but we're not friends. Like, you know, and not even in a way that, like, I mean, there are a lot of people, and there are always like these gradations of friendship, right? Like, there are people who I feel very close to, but who I might see once a year because primarily our relationships are on the internet and stuff like that, and that goes for a lot of people with whom like who have been editors of mine at various points. Like, you know, I think Nava and I are really good friends, despite her no longer being my editor and stuff. But the simplicity that I mean is just that, like with my editors at the Times, like it is a purely transactional relationship. I write a thing, I send it to them, they edit it, I get the edits back, boom. We don't like particularly talk about our days or like the feelings that we are having presently. Although I will say, this is totally a sidebar, the pandemic has sort of changed that, because the question of like, so how are you is like impossible to not like layer with the enormous difficulties everyone's going through. But and anyways, but that being said, it is a simpler relationship. It does also mean that if something personal is affecting my ability to get something in by a deadline and stuff like that, it is much harder to talk about. It is much harder to broach that subject. And that's something that I've had some not, I don't know if, well, some difficulty. I mean, it's just like, obviously I do it. It's just like, it's still a thing that is going to happen. I have to, like, I like earlier this year had like a really enormous family emergency. And so like writing to the editors, I'm so sorry, I am having a family emergency. Like, it was a thing that I hated doing. It was like pulling teeth, but it was necessary. And it still sort of felt like skirting, you know, a weird boundary there. But it was necessary. There was nothing to be done. And then they were great. They were great about it, because you can just be great about that sort of thing while not being friends with someone. But so anyway, that's kind of what I meant. I don't know if that answers your question, Ali, but yes.
From Piper. Hey, Piper. Do you find it awkward sometimes developing a relationship with agents/authors in non-agent/author partnership? Piper, are you telling me that we're not friends anymore? Is that what's happening right now? No. Generally, I don't find it awkward. You know, in part, I recognize that for some people, you know, they don't want to be friends with if you're an author, they don't want to be friends with other agents or whatever, which, you know, it's sort of no skin off my back, right? Like, okay, we're not going to be friends. That's cool. Like, I don't feel deeply rejected in those situations. You meet a lot of people in this business. You're not going to be friends with everybody, and that's genuinely fine. One of the weirdest interactions I ever had, though, was I was at a workshop, and, you know, we all sat down to lunch at the beginning of the workshop, and it was a series. It was about half writers, half agents, and one editor, Nava, actually, once again. And this one agent sat down, and the first thing he said was, you know, I don't talk to writers that I don't represent because I don't want them to feel like I'm trying to poach them. And we all just looked at him like, what are we supposed to do here then? This table's half writers. Are you just going to only talk to the agents here? Like, and also, like, you know, I have many friends who are writers because I've been in this business for 15 years. You know, I have friends who I've rejected 3 or 4 times at this point, and for some reason they still want to be friends with me, and we still hang. And, you know, I mean, like, that's part of being in this business, is being able to navigate those relationships. So I'm sure there are ways in which that can be awkward. I generally feel somebody has to be working pretty hard to make it awkward. You know what I mean? Like the agent that I mentioned. So it's not something I think about a lot. I am careful to make sure that it doesn't feel like I'm trying to poach somebody if I'm friends with somebody. But yeah, anyways. Piper, I'm sorry about that joke. We are 100% still friends.
The thing that you're describing puts me in mind of like, you know, the 19th century British cultural mores where like a woman cannot be alone in the same room as a man.
This is Michael Pence
because...
not being able to have dinner with an unaccompanied woman. Yeah,
yes,
I mean,
yes.
like what? I can't have a conversation with an unaccompanied writer. What's happening?
Like, I'm sorry, my agent has to chaperone this conversation with this other agent. It's like, come on.
Exactly.
Oh, that's super weird. Whatever. And gross. I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't want to impugn whoever the other person was, but.
Oh, don't worry. This is a person who's been widely impugned and should continue to be widely impugned, but I'm not going to say who it is for litigious reasons.
That's great. Okay.
Anyways. Piper, or I'm sorry, Amal, do you have comments you wanted to make about, being friends with other agents so that I know who to hunt down and drive out of this business?
Do I have any comments? I mean, the agent who has probably been friendliest to me is Seth. So it's, I mean, if you want to hunt Seth down, I'm sure do you know what lake he's at? You could probably do that.
I do, actually. I know exactly where he's at. Seth, bless his heart, has DM'd me on multiple occasions telling me that he's going to have coffee or lunch or drink with one of my clients, and is always like very much like, oh, I'm not going to try and steal. I'm like, Seth, I know, it's totally fine. Go have a nice lunch. They're cool. I'm very fond of that person. You guys will have a good time, and it's very funny to me. But yes. I do not return the favor when I'm like having dinner with Mary Robinette or something like that. It's like, whatever. I've known Mary Robinette for years. We're having dinner. Go away.
That's amazing. I love this so much.
Yeah. Anyways. Okay, last question. How do you feel the author-agent relationship changes once there's an author-editor relationship? Can you talk about navigating that transition? That's a really good question. For me, my relationship with my client doesn't change that much. It does change a little bit, right? I take a step back from the active management of their day-to-day work process, right? Because the editor's there now, the marketing team's there now, all these things. So, they go into a different bucket for me in terms of like developing and getting ready to go out with something once it's sold and placed. And, this is something actually I've been learning over the past year. I need to be a little bit more careful about that transition, because I've had a few people be like, hey, you like felt like you abandoned me or something, not quite that bad, but like, felt like that they felt that step back that I took in a very real way, in a way that I had not intended for them to feel that way. But in part, in my head, it's like, okay, we've sold the project. There's a team working on this now. I'm not primarily responsible for the editing of that project. That editor is now going to be putting their spin on it and taking it to market. So, my role here is much less pronounced and is more about making sure the relationship with the publisher is going smoothly rather than me managing the book in the way that I had before. So, it does evolve. It is still very important for me to maintain that relationship and make sure that author feels cared for. And it's been an interesting lesson to me about ways in which I need to rethink how I do that and how I manage that transition, given, a couple situations that have come up in the past, year or so. So
there's a couple of things I want to say about this. One, so first that I've really appreciated still like feeling your presence there. I mean, for Time War, when we got the cover in, you were part of that consultation process. When we were discussing the title, you were part of that consultation process, and there was...
I'm surprised Nava didn't murder me during that period. I was such a pain in her butt. Like, anyways, yeah.
And that was that was extremely, again, educational for me, but it also, it wasn't just the fact that you were, my agent being on side during that process, again, which went, I thought, I don't know how much you were shielding us from, but like, I thought it went really smoothly. There was a lot of back and forth, but none of it was like contentious. Like it was, but the fact, it wasn't just the fact of you, being an agent on side. It was the fact that I knew you had a lot of experience with exactly this thing. So it felt like, you were bringing an angle of experience to bear on the production side of things that I appreciated. It felt like just kind of getting a leg up, you know, like while my correspondence with Nava about things was in the purely business channel, like with you, we could have conversations about like, how does this make us feel? How do we feel about the direction of this? And kind of like process a bunch of feelings about the project before talking to the editor. And that was something that I appreciated. But the other thing was, and I think this may have been before we started working together. But I remember relaying to you a conversation I'd had with an editor, not about my work, but about that editor's strategy in acquiring work, where, you know, like we were talking about just like a specific strategy that an editor has within a publishing house, and saying basically how potentially lowballing someone on a bid might be a good thing because it can get like a trilogy on board or something like that. And I think I was relaying this to you purely in like, I had never thought of things like this before, and you were like, don't think of things like this because that is like publisher propaganda. That's not what you said, but it was definitely like, it was just, again, a moment of like, oh, right, because editors think of this in different ways, and agents think of this in ways that are, you know, ostensibly in their client's interest and stuff. And I shouldn't substitute the one for the other just because it's new information. So that was also helpful, just to know that like things that I might be told by an editor are not necessarily going to be in my best interest, even though they might be coming from someone who I like a lot, and who I have no reason to, you know. And
I don't think that editor was being deliberately misleading. I think that is just the difference between me being 100% on the author side versus an editor who's responsible to the company that they work for, right?
And to their own career,
looking at the world.
Yeah, and to their own career, for that matter. So like, it was just like, but it was a teaching moment for me that I also appreciated in terms of like that transition. That I would always like bring things to you from an editor if I was at all unsure, or that I never felt like I had to like stand alone. If it felt like anything was becoming confrontational or something like that with an editor.
Yeah. I think that's the goal, is to make the writer feel that they have backup whenever they need it. You know, the thing that I often say is that I exist to be thrown under the bus, right? Like, or, you know, you
have a weird fixation with buses, and I don't like it. No more buses for you. You're not getting hit by any buses. I am extremely not okay with it.
I have never been hit by a bus. I have been hit by a van. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Like, I exist to say no to things. I exist to be the bad guy, right? You know, anytime, you know, there is a negative interaction that needs to happen, anytime we need to get something out of a publisher that they've been unwilling to do, or to have that argument, then that is when I get tapped in, because my entire job is that I can be a professional hard ass, right? I can professionally push people and say, this isn't acceptable, or we need to do this, or, you know, you're fucking this up in one way or another. And, you know, so making sure the writer feels that I'm there for that is important in that relationship, because I have my own relationship with the editor, with the publishing house, and, you know, I know the people involved, and I can be critical and demand things while still maintaining that relationship over time, or being able to repair that relationship after the fact, and those kind of things, right? That's a big part of my job, when the writer needs to feel a closeness and a trust with their editor and their publisher. So, you know, in that way, the relationship also changes, because I become just sort of, you know, backup support that can get tapped in whenever things are going off the rails. So, yeah. Okay. I think that is all the questions that we have. Thank you for sticking around a little bit longer. I know we've run almost an hour and a half at this point. Unsurprising that Amal and I go on a bit here. Anyways, thank you for tuning into Agent Talk with Seth and DongWon, or in this case, with Amal and DongWon. We hope you have enjoyed this conversation. Amal, where can people find you on the internet?
I am presently, for my health, on Twitter hiatus, but I'll be back on there at some point for my not health. So it's at Tithenai, Tithenai. I'm also on Substack, amal.substack.com. And I have a website that is amalelmohtar.com, all one word. But yeah, mostly I'm communicating through Substack while not on Twitter, because Twitter sucks. even though I love it.
Twitter, it's a nightmare. You can find me on Twitter on sort of semi-hiatus, not full hiatus, but I'm at DongWon on Twitter. I also have a Substack called...
How can I do that? How can I put my thing?
I
don't know. Never mind.
Pull the banners.
That's okay.
I did not prep a banner for your Substack. I apologize. What was I saying? Oh, yes. You can find me on Substack as well. My Substack is publishingishard.substack.com. I'm prepping a new one of those to go out next week. It's been a minute since I've sent one. And we will be back next Friday at 1 p.m. EST, 10 a.m. PST. If you have questions, please email us at agenttalkshow@gmail.com. Seth will be back from his lakeside sojourn by then, and we look forward to talking to you then. Until then, be good, read more, and publish better. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thanks for having me.